Hello, good friends. This is Science and Spirituality on Supreme Master Television. Today we will be interviewing Dr. Joe Dispenza, an American expert on the role and function of the human brain. Dr. Dispenza's training and education are in the fields of neurology, neuroscience, cellular biology, memory formation, aging, and longevity. He also has a Doctor of Chiropractic degree and is an honorary member of the National Board of Chiropractic Examiners in the United States. Over the last decade, Dr. Dispenza has traveled all over the world, informing people of the power of the mind. Dr. Dispenza says we can reprogram and rewire our brain in order to end bad habits, change our lifestyles, and promote healing of the body. He has authored the book Evolve Your Brain and produced several DVDs and CDs featuring his past seminars. He is well known for having appeared in the critically acclaimed 2004 American documentary, What the Bleep Do We Know? Dr. Dispenza is a living example of the practice of his philosophy. Years ago, an accident left him with several broken bones in his back. The grim prognosis by doctors was that he would never be able to walk again. The story of how Dr. Dispenza was able to heal his body without conventional medicine is fascinating. Let us now join our talk with this amazing gentleman and learn more about his ideas.
We are here with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he is going to be talking to us about the evolution of the brain and what our potential is. So welcome to the show today.
Happy to be with you.
I'd like to start with, how did you first get interested in this field?
Well, I've always been interested in human potential. I'm interested in what makes human beings tick, but I got run over by a truck in a triathlon back in 1986 and broke 6 bones in my back, and the diagnosis was that I would probably never walk again. I had multiple compression fractures of my thoracic spine, and I had bone fragments on my spinal cord. So the recommendation at the time was radical surgery from 4 different surgeons in Southern California. Anyway, I decided not to have the surgery, and my belief at the time, and still is, that the power that made the body heals the body. I decided that if I could take some time and begin to connect or develop a relationship with that power, that intelligence, if I could begin to give it some instructions, give it some orders, to give it a template, and then create an idea or a picture of what I wanted, and then surrender this condition to this mind and ask it to begin to do the healing for me, that maybe it might work. And so I decided to not let any thought go by unchecked, a thought that would be connected to the possibility of never walking again, or any of the fears or anxieties that people typically have.
Dr. Dispenza was determined to cure himself.
So every day, 2 hours a day, twice a day, I would reconstruct my spine from start to finish. And if my mind wandered to an extraneous thought, or I began to worry or get afraid, I would stop and start all over again from the very beginning. And what I didn't know at the time was that I was developing a good amount of focus and a good amount of concentration. I wanted it to be the exact thing I wanted, and because I didn't have the surgery, they told me that it would take 6 months to a year to walk again, and I'd have to wear this big body cast. And I was back on my feet in 9.5 weeks, and back training at around 11 weeks, and back in my office in 12 weeks. So,
at what point did you realize that you were seeing results, and that must have given you more interest in continuing on with that program?
I was in extreme pain, a terrible pain, and I had some neurological changes in my body. And so when my body started to respond in ways, and pain levels were going back, and feeling was coming back, and movement was coming back, I was pretty excited. That was the feedback I needed, because the brain learns by feedback. In other words, when we see some observable change, we can correlate what we did inside to produce that effect.
The doctors must have been shocked.
Yeah, they were. They were actually shocked. The third doctor that I saw was the director of Scripps Hospital at the time in San Diego. And he was adamant that I had the surgery. When I decided to forego the surgery, he wanted me to see the psychiatrist because he thought I had post-traumatic stress. But when I got on my feet, I called him up and we had a great conversation, and he was pretty happy that I was able to make it happen.
In the following conversation, Dr. Dispenza discusses 2 of the 4 main commonalities he has observed from studying people who have experienced spontaneous remissions from serious medical conditions.
Now, you've done a lot of study on spontaneous remission.
When I was spending those long nights, laying down and couldn't sleep, I just made myself a deal. I just said if I'm ever able to walk again, that I would spend the rest of my life studying the mind-body connection. And so it started my investigation into spirituality and my investigation into health and attitude. I traveled to 17 different countries over the last 11 years now and studied people that were diagnosed with serious health conditions, and then they changed their mind and they got better. And so it was so exciting to me. I went back to school and got a degree in neuroscience because I wanted to understand what it was that they were doing that was producing those effects. And so it kind of catapulted me to the next level.
What is it that they were doing that produces those effects?
There were 4 common things that I noticed that got my attention. And the first thing was that they all believed and accepted that there was some spiritual aspect that lived within them, that there is something that gives us life. And there's nothing mystical about spirituality. It's a consciousness, it's an intelligence that keeps your heart beating 2 gallons of blood per minute, 100 gallons of blood in an hour, 100,000 times in one day through 60,000 miles of blood vessels. That we lose 10 million cells every second and we make another 10 million cells. Something's giving us life. There's a mind that's so much greater than our mind, that has a will so much greater than our will, and has a love for life that's so much greater than our love for life, our personality self. And when our will matches its will, when our mind matches its mind, and when our love for life matches its love for us or for life, that's when it begins to respond. So they began to develop a relationship with this invisible force. Just like you develop a relationship with your husband or your wife or your mother or father or your kids or your dog or your pets, they took time out of their day to begin to put their attention on, begin to interact with it. And they wanted to surrender again that condition to this giver of life. And they gave it some pretty strong instructions, and they asked for help. And this consciousness loves us so much that it allows us our free will. So if we insist on suffering, it gives life to reinforce our suffering. And then if we insist on joy, it organizes our bodies and our life in ways that match who we are being. So that's the first thing they had in common. The second thing they had in common is that they all understood that it was their own mismanagement of their thoughts and reactions that created their disease. We live in 2 states of mind. We live in survival or creation. And when we live in those states of anger or aggression or hatred or judgment or fear or anxiety or insecurity or pain or suffering or depression, it's those chemicals that are created from the chemicals of stress or survival that activate those states of mind. And the redundancy of those chemicals are the chemicals that push the genetic buttons that begin to cause disease. You see, every time we have a thought, we make a chemical. So if we have a great thought or if we have an unlimited thought, we make chemicals that make us feel great or feel unlimited. And if we have negative thoughts or self-depreciating thoughts, we make chemicals that make us feel negative or unworthy. So this immaterial thing called thought fires a set of circuits in the brain that produces a chemical to signal the body for us to feel exactly the way we were just thinking. The moment we feel the way we think, we begin to think the way we feel, which produces more chemicals for us to think the way we feel.
This creates a big loop.
And this loop, this cycle of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking, creates what I call a state of being. And it's the cycle of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking over time that begins to condition the body to memorize that emotional state better than the conscious mind. The third thing they had in common is that they said that they had to reinvent themselves. They had to become somebody else. They couldn't be the same person any longer. They began to change their brain just by thinking differently. And we can do that. And the neuroscience behind it says that we can change our brain whenever we learn new things, but more importantly, we can begin to rehearse mentally rehearse who we want to be. And as we do that, we force the brain to fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations. And whenever we make the brain work differently, we just made a new mind. The last thing they had in common, which I found so unique, was that they had long moments where they lost track of time and space, where they were sitting down and they were creating this new ideal that when they opened their eyes, they expected it to be an hour later. I mean, they opened their eyes, they thought it was 20 minutes and it was an hour and a half later. In other words, they became so involved in their rehearsal that time and space disappeared. And they moved from that state of survival to the state of creation. In the state of creation, we become selfless. We forget about ourselves. And on functional imagery, if you look at nuns in a reverie of prayer or Buddhist monks in meditation, the part of the brain that turns on is called the frontal lobe, and that is like the volume control of the brain. And when the frontal lobe begins to work properly, it quiets down all the other circuits in the brain so nothing else is being processed but a single-minded thought. And all of a sudden they started to experience altruistic states of compassion and joy and inspiration and goodwill. What they didn't know is that the moment they were doing that, they were reconditioning the body to a new mind. They were beginning to change the gene and activate new genetic expressions as a result of it.
And heal.
And heal.
As the result.
As a result, yes.
Scientists found very unique phenomena while conducting research regarding the meditation practice of Buddhist monks.
In the experimentation that were done on the Buddhist monks, they produced a brainwave pattern called gamma waves. And gamma waves are when you're in the zone, when you're totally connected, when you're in the flow. And the interesting thing is that when the brain is in synchrony, you know, when all the circuits in the brain are producing the same frequency, we could say that the brain now is working more in a holistic sense. In other words, more parts are talking to other parts. The brain is in psychic union. As a result of that, that gamma wave is when those coherent signals cause circuits to begin to form and maintain new circuitry and new connections. And when the monks came out of the meditation and they tested them hours later, they were still maintaining that gamma pattern even though they were no longer in meditation, which says not only were they in bliss, but they were in a functional state of unity in which their internal order was greater than their external environment. And that's my definition of mastery, when we've maintained an internal chemical, neurological, and emotional state so well that nothing in our external world can move us from it. But when we produce coherent patterns in the brain, synchronized coherent patterns, the immune system gets very strong. These monks didn't get sick because their system was so integrated and so orderly that disease couldn't live in their body. The signal that's traveling down the central nervous system is creating amazing order that allows the body to begin to function in wonderful ways. And mind can't change the brain because mind is the product of the brain. Mind is the brain in action. So who's changing the brain and the mind? And that's called consciousness. It's the immaterial aspect, the spiritual aspect of us that uses a brain and a body to produce different levels of mind. And only when we're truly conscious, and only when we're truly self-aware, only when we notice, can we begin to make measurable changes in our life.
When our mind changes, our lives change as well.
When I was talking about creating my day on the movie What the Bleep, what I was saying most importantly was that if I'm going to sit down and take the time to emulate the Creator, if I'm going to be like God, if I'm going to emulate the quantum field which gives life to all things, if I am going to express divinity and I'm going to be a creator, I want to know that my thoughts count. And I want to know that I, some way, made contact with this mind. So I need a sign to let me know, great mind, cosmic mind, that I've been heard by you. And I want you to bring a signal or a sign to me in my life in a way that I could least expect. Because if I could expect it, it's not new, right? I want it to be unknown, and I want it to be surprising. I want it to surprise me so that it leaves no doubt that my efforts today were heard and noticed by you. And so that I have such joy from the experience that it inspires me to want to do it again. Now, we're no longer living as victims to the environment. We're no longer allowing whatever it is out there to produce this internal chemical change, and we associate that event or reacting to how we feel. Instead, we've done something internally that's produced an effect externally, and we're going to pay attention to what we did in here that did that there. Now, our environment is no longer controlling our thinking is now controlling our environment.
Dr. Dispenza has noted that celebrated inventors and scientists throughout history have had similar characteristics in terms of the functioning of their brains.
Now, great inventors in history, or great visionaries that had genius ideas, they had the ability to function neuroplastically. They had the ability to have a neuroplastic brain, which means in the brain the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. So they could learn something and begin to speculate and ask questions and begin to think about those answers. For example, Einstein, when he was 12 years old, he asked himself this question: if I ride my bicycle at the speed of light and I turn my headlights on, will they go on? Now, he thought about that question every single day of his life. And now, 10 years later, he's working as a clerk in a Swiss patent office, and he's watching a man fix a roof. And he's just looking out the window, and he kind of pauses and he stares. And the moment he goes blank, he understands relativity in 1 second. The vision was so clear, he had to go back to school to learn the mathematics to explain the vision that he saw. It was outside of his understanding intellectually. And when he published his papers on relativity, there were no footnotes. So where did that information come from? It came from a greater level of consciousness, not the consciousness that makes up the free will of you and I, the journeyman and the journeywoman on the progress of life, but the universal consciousness. So as he began to create the mind of the understanding of relativity, his brain became a receiver of information from the quantum field, and he tuned into that mind, and then the brain began to download the information. Because the quantum field is an information field, his brain became completely rewired to understand exactly what it was. When I studied spontaneous remissions, I learned a lot of things about human nature, and unfortunately, most people wait for crisis or trauma to get serious about change. Probably over 90% of the people on the planet live in survival. They live reacting to their environment, or they can create survival just by thought alone. They can create the chemistry of stress just by thinking about something that's going to happen in the future or something that's happened to them in the past. And so they're living by those chemicals and those emotions. But we have 3 brains in one brain, and those 3 brains allow us to go from thinking to doing to being. So the thinking brain is the neocortex. That's that corrugated, walnut-shaped fold and valley bumps of gray matter that is the home of the identity. You're listening to me right now with your neocortex. And when we learn new information, when we learn philosophy, when we learn knowledge, when we learn data, we forge new circuits in the brain. That's what learning is, making new connections. And we store that circuitry, that information. It leaves a footprint in the brain in terms of synaptic connection.
Any new experience creates a memory. One has to learn how to reinforce the positive experience or practice applying the experience until it turns into a habit.
So, you read the book by Gandhi about peace. And you go to church or you go to your spiritual organization and you shake hands with everybody and say, "Peace be with you." Now, the next step is how are you going to apply it? How are you going to modify your behavior in some way? When you have a new experience, the end product is called a feeling or an emotion. And we can remember experiences better because we can remember how they feel. Because that new experience in your environment produced a new internal chemistry. It disrupted your chemical continuity. And because you started to feel differently, the brain woke up for a moment and you paid attention to whatever it was out there that made you feel this way internally. It's called a memory. And so when we have a new experience, when we apply peace now, when you're pulling out of church and instead of cutting somebody off, you let them go ahead of you, just demonstrated peace. And when you demonstrate peace, you have a new emotion. You begin to feel it. Ah, I feel that. Or you go to your boss and instead of judging him and getting angry, you actually sit down in a state of peace. Now, we're chemically teaching the body, we're instructing the body to what the mind has intellectually understood.
A habit becomes established and is the state of being when memorized by the body.
So knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. And that experience then is measured in feeling. So when you demonstrate peace, you feel the feeling of peace, so the body gets the signal. But it's not enough to have the experience once. We have to be able to replicate it at will, to do it over and over again, and make it look natural and easy. And when we're able to repeat it at will, we activate that third brain called the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is the microprocessor in the brain, and that's where we've practiced something so many times that the body has the memory as well as the conscious mind. And that's what a habit is. A habit is when the body has become the mind. So when we're in a state of being, we would say that the mind and body are working together, and the body's been conditioned both neurologically and chemically through experience that it now knows compassion better than the conscious mind. And now we're in a state of being. You see, the thought, how you think, is the electrical charge in the quantum field. And how you feel is the magnetic charge you emanate. So how you think and feel creates an electromagnetic field that affects every single atom in your life. When we have a group of people that can think compassion, think peace, think goodwill and generosity, charity, and demonstrate it, and be able to maintain that state of being where they've memorized it internally, nothing in their external world can move them from it. When they're in a state of being, they're more prone to do things and think things equal to that state of being. Meditation is the process of knowing yourself, understanding who you are, and because we have such a large frontal lobe, we can observe our own thoughts, our own actions, and our own behaviors, and that concept in neuroscience is called metacognition. And because we can do that, that allows us to modify and change our behavior so that we can do a better job in life. If you're doing meditation, in the beginning it takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of awareness to be able to connect. But if you're doing meditation properly, you want to meditate because it feels so great. You're elevated, you're lifted, you're coherent, you want that feeling. In Tibetan, the exact translation of the word meditation means to become familiar with, to make known. Once you begin to have the thought become the experience, the end product of an experience is called an emotion. And if your experience is happening in your mind, you are beginning to feel elevated. Now we're reconditioning the body to a new mind, and now we have changed the circuitry. We reminded ourselves every day of who we wanted to be, and we've conditioned the body to a new mind. And when that person gets up and they can become familiar with that new self, we could say now that they're in a state of meditation because now they're memorizing a new aspect of themselves as well.
Dr. Dispenza further explains how practicing meditation transforms the brain.
So the process of meditation requires unlearning and relearning, or what neuroscience calls pruning synaptic connections and sprouting new connections. If your thinking and feeling has been negative for the last 20 years, your mind may be thinking positively, but your body is remembering being negative. 90% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old is sitting in a subconscious set of programs, automatic programs that operate without our conscious mind. And so here's the 10% of your conscious mind wanting to change against 90% of who we've become as a personality. So we have to learn how to get into the operating system It takes going past the analytical mind to be able to do that, and that takes practice. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. And meditation really means to begin to think or begin to manage your internal world without the influence of the external world.
To close, Dr. Dispenza reiterates that bringing out the best within ourselves need not be initiated by suffering.
My message is really simple. Why wait for a disease, for crisis in your life? We could either learn and change in a state of joy and true inspiration, or we can learn and change in a state of suffering, in chaos and urgency. And let's choose the former. We're the best when we're spontaneous. We're the best when we're not concerned about how we look or if we're succeeding or failing or who's watching. We're the best when we're just loose and we're free. And so the universe works in unusual ways to lighten us up and to bring us experiences that make us move into a state of joy.
We sincerely thank Dr. Joe Dispenza for sharing his perspectives on the mind-body connection, the power of thoughts, and the nature of habits, as well as for his wisdom regarding how meditation can transform our lives. May we all realize our greatest selves.